Have you ever watched someone fight for dignity, when the world insists they have none? On the far reaches of the Virginia frontier, the soil is stained with humiliation. British officers ride high on their gleaming horses, while the humble patriots they rule are crushed beneath boot and tax. Families starve, children tremble, and those who are weakest in body are those the empire mocks most cruelly. Eliza Gray is 16, a patriot at heart, but winter fever stole both her legs and the British would have her believe her worth was stolen too. Yet look at her hands, calloused, determined, turning the wooden wheels that scrape through the dust. Every movement a struggle, every breath a quiet act of rebellion. She refuses to bow, she refuses to break. Freedom still burns in her chest. Her parents, Elias and Mercy, bear the weight of hunger and tyranny, praying their daughter will one day taste the liberty the crown so violently withholds. Have you ever felt powerless? What you are about to hear may shock you, because sometimes the smallest spark, the one most ignored, becomes the flame that changes everything. Stay with me. This is just the beginning, and soon you will see how courage rises from the dust. The day Colonel Edmund Harrow arrived, the wind itself seemed to recoil. His horse, taller than any the Greys had ever seen, stomped arrogance into the dirt. His uniform gleamed with polished silver, a predator wrapped in velvet and entitlement. In his gloved hand, a black ledger, thick with lies. He opened it slowly, savoring the power it gave him. "Your debt grows," he declared, voice smooth like poison. Elias Gray felt the words strike deeper than any weapon. He worked the land with bleeding hands, paid every coin he could gather, yet the numbers only multiplied. British greed always demanded more. Eliza watched from her wheelchair, silent. The dust around her wheels felt like chains. Mercy's fingers trembled at her daughter's shoulders. She sensed the disgrace coming even before the officer's smirk twisted darker. Harrow leaned closer, eyes roaming the farm like a lord surveying property. Then his gaze sank to Eliza. "There is one way I might forgive what you owe," he said. A pause, a cruel enjoyment of their dread. "Your daughter becomes my wife." Elias froze. Mercy gasped as if struck. Eliza's heartbeat thundered against her ribs. Marriage? To the very tyranny that laughed at her suffering. Humiliation burned through her veins. She felt like prey, dragged into the open, stripped of dignity. Harrow's grin widened at their horror. "Consider it a gift," he taunted. "I offer your crippled girl a chance at purpose." An insult sharpened like a blade. Elias's jaw shook, rage clawing inside him. But the memory of tax collectors and threats held him still. The British crushed any patriot who dared resist. Eliza's eyes filled with fire, not tears. Liberty was her birthright, not a toy for an aristocrat's pleasure. She gripped her wheels until her knuckles blanched. "I am not your charity," she whispered. Harrow laughed, mocking her courage, her body, her existence. "Think carefully," the colonel warned. "One refusal, and I take everything. House, land, food, even her chair." That chair, her fragile vessel of independence, suddenly felt like a battlefield. Mercy collapsed to her knees, pleading with heaven, torn between protection and despair. Elias looked at his daughter, the cruel decision crushing his soul. Was sacrifice the only way to save them from ruin, or would betrayal of her spirit destroy something far greater? Eliza inhaled, gathering strength from the soil beneath her. This ground belonged to patriots long before British boots arrived. she would not surrender her life to their dominion. "I choose dignity," she declared, each word a strike of defiance. Harrow's eyes darkened. His pride could not tolerate rebellion from those he deemed less than human. He tore a page from the ledger. "Then your suffering begins," he hissed, shoving it into Elias's chest. "The Empire does not forget." With a sneer, he spurred his horse. Dust and contempt lingered behind him like a storm yet to break. In the silence left behind, the Greys realized something had changed. Fear remained, but courage had awakened beside it. Eliza looked at her parents, no longer the burden she once believed herself to be. Something within her was transforming, a hidden truth rising. Even without legs, she could stand for America's independence. For every silenced voice, for every heart yearning to breathe free, her journey into rebellion had begun, and the path ahead promised revelations that would test love, faith, and the very meaning of freedom. Reverend Matthew Pike once preached that every soul held equal worth before the Creator. His voice had lifted weary hearts, given the poor a taste of dignity in a world determined to crush them. But now his hands trembled as a pouch of British silver hit his table. The coins clattered like chains. Colonel Harrow's messenger watched with cold satisfaction, knowing virtue often collapses under hunger and fear. Pike stared at the silver too long, his hesitation already a betrayal. Sheriff Crow arrived next, boot heels stomping tyranny into the church floor, a hulking man with eyes as hollow as a gallows knot. He leaned close, breath sour with threats and power. "Bless their union," he growled, "or swing like Patriot scum." A promise soaked in menace, a noose disguised as law. Pike swallowed his shame. He nodded. The deal was done. The news slithered through the settlement like sickness. Neighbors averted their eyes as the Gray family passed. Terror spread, quick, silent, uniformed. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers clenched fists they feared to raise. British domination didn't need swords to wound. Silence was their weapon, and it pierced deepest. Eliza felt the contempt weighing upon her like stones, pity cloaked in disgust, strangers whispering that she should be grateful, that someone of rank wanted her, as though degradation was a blessing. She rolled her chair forward, chin high, refusing to bow her head. Her body might be broken, but her spirit would never kneel. At home, Elias struggled to breathe beneath the burden of disgrace. He had survived famine, storms, war, yet nothing compared to selling his daughter's future to the enemy. Mercy wept behind closed doors, praying for a miracle she feared would never come. Each tear tasted like surrender. That night, a candle burned low beside Eliza's bed. She watched the flame flicker, fragile yet undefeated. She remembered how Harrow looked at her, not as a woman, not even as a cripple, as property, a possession to parade. Her stomach twisted with revulsion. But beneath the fear, a seed of rebellion rooted deeper. She pictured the faces of other patriots, John Thompson, whipped for missing a tax payment, Widow Barnes, her farm seized for questioning the redcoats, young Samuel, beaten for speaking of independence. Each injustice added fuel to her growing fire. If she remained silent, she would become another story of despair, another victory for the crown. Her mind raced with dangerous possibilities. Could she run, fight, seek allies in the shadows of the uprising whispered across the colonies? She knew only one truth for certain. Accepting Harrow's offer meant death of the soul. A cage wrapped in silk was still a cage. Her journey toward transformation demanded sacrifice, even if the price was steep. Eliza placed a hand over her heart. She felt more than a pulse. She felt purpose, a hidden truth rising. Liberty is not gifted by kings. It is earned by those who refuse to surrender. If the English intended to steal her dignity, they would have to fight for every shred of it. Outside, thunder muttered across the hills. A storm was forming, in the sky and within her. She lifted her gaze to the darkness beyond the window. She did not fear the night. Darkness simply made. The flames of independence burn brighter. Tomorrow she would make her decision known. A decision that could destroy her family or change everything. Dinah Brooks moved like a shadow through the vestry, but her courage shone brighter than any stained-glass window. She had sewn uniforms for British men who called her people worthless. She had mended dresses for mothers who could no longer lift their heads under the crown's weight. Her needle was her weapon, her silence, her shield. When she learned of the silver that bought Reverend Pike's conscience, fury stitched itself through her veins. She pressed a small slip of parchment into Mercy Gray's trembling hand. A receipt, proof of corruption, the price of their disgrace written in cold ink. "The truth deserves to breathe," Dinah whispered. Her voice barely a breath, but stronger than musket fire. Mercy's heart pounded like a drum calling men to war. That night, by the dim glow of a single lantern, she hid the slip of parchment. Inside a ribbon, Eliza's favorite. Every stitch a prayer, every knot a plea. "Lord, expose wickedness," she murmured, fingers shaking with fear and defiance. She tied the ribbon into her daughter's hair, tucking justice close to her mind. If the English dared steal her child, they would unwittingly parade their own corruption before heaven and men. Eliza felt the weight of it, not just the ribbon, but the faith sewn into it. Proof of betrayal, a spark of rebellion, her mother's sacrifice wrapped around her like armor. She looked at Mercy, saw the sorrow etched into her features, and something inside her hardened. No more shame, she vowed. She would transform this degradation into destiny. If her body was weak, her purpose would be iron. The next morning, the village watched the Greys with suffocating pity. British soldiers lounged near the road, mocking laughter dripping from their lips. They saw colonists as animals, good only for toil and obedience. Eliza rolled past them, back, straight, eyes unbroken. One redcoat sneered, "Pretty bow for a cripple." She met his gaze with fire, the ribbon's secret burning beneath his insult. She refused to let their cruelty reshape her. She would reshape fate instead. Elias walked beside her, carrying guilt like a stone on his back. He wanted to fight, to swing his axe and drive the empire from his land. But every decision seemed a trap. Loyalty to family meant surrendering to tyranny. His shame was a wound that would not clot. Yet, seeing Eliza's resolve, he felt the first pulse of hope. The belief that transformation sometimes begins with the one who suffers most. Mercy followed, eyes dry now. The time for tears had ended. Her daughter was no sacrifice to be offered at the altar of English greed. She was a spark of independence waiting to ignite the world. Mercy knew the road ahead would demand immense sacrifice. But God often chose the broken to reveal hidden truths. At the church door, Reverend Pike waited, collar tight. Around a throat, choking on guilt. Harrow's men watched eagerly, as though witnessing a show designed to degrade a patriot soul. The air tasted like betrayal, like chains tightening. Eliza paused. Her breath steadied. She touched the ribbon, proof of sin, proof of survival. She understood now. Her journey wasn't meant to end in submission. Every cruelty she endured sharpened her purpose. Dignity was not a privilege. It was a declaration, and she would declare it loudly, even if her voice shook the sky. She lifted her chin toward the altar where lies and silver tried to masquerade as virtue. Her heart thundered. Her decision was made. The moment to strike would soon arrive, and when it did, the Empire would regret ever underestimating a girl in a wheelchair. Right, the flame of freedom lives in me. The barn smelled of hay and desperation. Moonlight slipped through the cracks in the boards like silver blades. Men gathered in whispers, hearts beating the rhythm of a nation on the edge of birth. Captain Ezra Cole stood tall among them, a simple farmer turned soldier, his coat patched, his resolve iron. His voice was low, but every word carried the weight of rebellion. "We strike during the vows," he said, "muskets raised only at tyrants, not a single innocent harmed." His gaze warned them that honor must survive even in war. Jonah Briggs checked his musket again and again, fingers trembling with both fear and devotion. He had seen friends flogged for speaking of independence. He had buried neighbors who dared defy tax collectors. Tonight he would answer those graves with fire. Caswell Reed crouched near the barn door, eyes fixed on the distant road, where redcoats roamed like wolves guarding stolen land. Each passing hoofbeat outside reminded them what they were risking, everything. The men looked to Eliza's home, dim lanterns flickering inside. They were not just saving a girl, they were saving dignity itself. The crown sought to buy her soul with silver and threats. Instead, her suffering bred a plan that might awaken a people. The Patriots understood. Liberty often begins with one voice saying no, even if that voice comes from a body broken. Eliza waited inside the farmhouse, wrapped in icy silence. Her parents paced, helpless, burdened by choices no family should face. Mercy tried to comfort her daughter, but the words died on her tongue. Elias sharpened a kitchen blade with shaking hands, knowing it was a poor defense against British steel. He would still use it if he must. A father's love could be fiercer than any army. Through the window, Eliza saw shadows shifting near the barn, patriots preparing to challenge the Empire. Their loyalty filled her chest with pride. She was no longer merely a victim. She was the reason men dared rise. The ribbon in her hair pressed against her skull, truth sewn into silk. That little slip of parchment could shatter a tyrant's lies, a single thread of justice strong enough to unravel a monster. Captain Cole entered quietly, hat pressed to his chest. He knelt before Eliza, as if honoring royalty. "Miss Gray," he said, "your courage brought us here. When the moment comes, we get you away from that altar of shame." She held his stare, voice calm as forged steel. "We do more than escape, we reveal them." She tapped the ribbon. His eyes widened with understanding. Corruption would face daylight. The British believed fear made patriots bend. Tonight, they would see Americans break chains instead. The plan was perilous. One misstep and the barn would become a grave, but silence had already killed too much hope. Sacrifice was the price of transformation. The men loaded powder, checked flints, whispered prayers. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. Outside, thunderheads crawled across the sky despite the moon's cold glow. Storms gathering again. Nature seemed ready to rise with them. Ezra Cole drew a map in the dirt. "Jonah, rafters with me. Caswell, watch the road. When the vows begin, the Sheriff will lower his guard, Harrow will smirk. Pike will pretend righteousness. That is when we strike. We protect the girl. We expose the corruption. We gift this town a spark of independence. Eliza maneuvered her wheels closer. This isn't only my war, she said. Every insult poured on me belongs to every patriot who ever bled for bread. Her words lit fire behind their eyes. She was the one without legs, yet everyone in that barn felt small beside her. The distant church bell rang once. Mournful and low. The ceremony approached. Their time had arrived. Captain Cole extinguished the lantern, leaving the barn in darkness, except for the fierce light burning in their hearts. Rebellion inhaled. Soon it would roar. Comment: I stand with the Patriots. The church bells tolled like hammers striking a coffin lid. Villagers filled the pews under the watch of redcoats, their silence commanded by musket and fear. Eliza's wheelchair creaked across the wooden floor, each turn of the wheels echoing like judgment. Her dress was white, but her eyes were storms waiting to break. The aisle ahead felt long as a lifetime. Shame wrapped around every whisper. Children stared with sorrow. Elders bowed their heads, powerless to defend dignity against the crown's contempt. Colonel Edmund Harrow waited near the altar, posture sharpened by pride. His medals gleamed like stolen stars. He smirked as if he owned the future, as if liberty itself knelt under his boot. Reverend Pike stood between them, collar choking him, guilt all but written across his trembling lips. When he lifted his prayer book, his voice cracked under the weight of silver. "We are gathered," he began, trying to sound holy while betrayal soured every word. Eliza looked up at Harrow. No fear, only defiance. She saw a coward armed with titles, a tyrant desperate to possess what he could never earn: respect. He leaned closer, whispering a promise of domination. She met his sneer with a glare that could have lit the fuse of war itself. Her mother clutched her hands in the front pew, knuckles bloodless. Elias sat beside Mercy, rage bottled tight, one wrong breath away from erupting. Families around them trembled, terrified that the fate forced on the Greys might one day devour their own children. The Crown's cruelty left no one untouched. Reverend Pike swallowed hard. "We are gathered here to unite." The words died, because thunder crashed without lightning, wood splintered, doors burst inward, smoke and dust swallowed the sanctuary. Children screamed. Soldiers reached for muskets too slow. And there, outlined by gunpowder haze, stood Captain Ezra Cole and a company of patriots. Muskets raised high, barrels aimed with purpose, not at the innocent, but at the uniforms that fed on fear. "Enough!" Cole thundered. His voice shook the rafters. "This insult ends now." Redcoats scrambled, steel scraping from scabbards. Harrow's face twisted from arrogance to fury, the mask of a man whose power had finally been challenged. He grabbed Eliza's arm with a bruising grip, forgetting she was human. She wrenched away, pushing her wheels back with strength born from injustice. Mercy rushed to shield her daughter. Elias surged forward, chair legs and fists against polished boots, a father reclaiming his honor. The church erupted into chaos, shouts, smoke, shattered pews. Patriots fired warning shots into the ceiling, rafter dust raining like ash. The air tasted of rebellion. Reverend Pike dropped his prayer book. Tears streaked down his cheeks. He stared at the pouch of silver in his pocket, like it was burning through his skin. His cowardice had led them here. His silence had nearly destroyed a child. With a trembling step, He positioned himself between Harrow and Eliza, voice bold for the first time. "This union is a crime before God." Harrow snarled, drawing his saber. A monster cornered. His blade glinted, ready to silence anyone daring to defy him. Eliza rolled forward, ribbon bright against her hair, the hidden proof pressing against her skull. She tore it free and held the stitched evidence high. "You bought this ceremony," she cried, words ringing like musket fire. "You purchased righteousness with silver. Let every soul see your disgrace." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reverend Pike nodded. Shame finally transformed into courage. The sheriff hesitated, fear flickering behind cruelty. The villagers felt chains loosening. The truth had been spoken in daylight, yet the fight was far from over. Harrow's fury promised retaliation. British steel had no mercy. And liberty. Liberty demanded sacrifice. As muskets levelled and swords rose, one truth blazed in every patriot heart. The journey toward independence had reached a point from which no one could turn back. Captain Cole's musket roared, the blast ripping into the rafters above. Splinters rained like a warning from heaven. The shot harmed no innocent soul. It simply told every heart in that sanctuary that the age of silent suffering had ended. Redcoats flinched, startled that courage dared breathe in front of the British crown. Jonah Briggs sprinted through smoke, seizing the handles of Eliza's chair. He pushed with desperate force, rolling her into Mercy's waiting arms. Mother and daughter collided in a fierce embrace, fear and relief mingling into something stronger, defiance. Elias stood in front of them, a shield forged from love, ready to face sabres with bare fists if he must. Cole marched to the altar, fury carried like a banner. He slammed Harrow's black ledger upon the sacred wood. The impact thundered across the room. Then he placed Eliza's ribbon, proof stitched in faith, beside it. "This," he shouted, voice echoing like prophecy, "is your holy union, depravity and debt." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Villagers rose from their pews as if shackles had fallen from their ankles. Mothers stared at Harrow with disgust. Fathers glared at the sheriff with newfound fire. The illusion of British righteousness cracked, its ugliness exposed beneath the steeple. Reverend Pike stepped forward, tears cutting through ash on his face. "I took silver," he confessed, loud enough for heaven to hear. "I betrayed my calling. I let greed smother justice." His hands hovered above the ledger as if it were venom. "But God has not abandoned this house. Only those who chose corruption over conscience." Colonel Harrow's jaw twisted into a monstrous snarl. His pride, once polished like his medals, now blistered with rage. "You dare accuse me?" he spat, eyes burning with murderous entitlement. He pointed to Eliza, voice dripping contempt. "That cripple should crawl in gratitude. I offered her station." A single word tore from Eliza's chest. No. It was soft. It was seismic. It was independence given voice. She wheeled forward, Mercy's hands guiding her. "You cannot purchase dignity," she declared. "Not with silver, not with blood. We are not property to be owned." Her courage struck harder than any bullet. Murmurs swelled into an uprising of breath. The colonists, poor farmers, widows, hungry children, stood taller. Shame they had swallowed for years now tasted like righteous fury. Harrow saw it, the spark spreading like wildfire, and fear briefly flickered behind his arrogance. Sheriff Crow reached for his pistol. Cole raised his musket in answer. Jonah cocked his weapon. Caswell Reed backed the Patriots, eyes fixed on the door to ensure no reinforcements stormed in. One heartbeat separated life from massacre. Harrow lifted his saber, tip trembling with wrath. "Shoot them," he ordered. Yet the redcoats hesitated. Some glanced at the crowd, at the truth sewn into silk, at the greed exposed in ink. Soldiers trained to crush rebellion now saw they were crushing humanity instead. And doubt is death to tyranny. "Lower your weapon," Pike demanded, the voice of a man reborn. "This altar will not witness desecration," Harrow roared, knocking the prayer book from the Reverend's hands. "Faith bends to power," he bellowed, but even he heard the lie. Cole took one step forward, eyes never leaving the villain. "Power rots, but liberty survives." Lightning flashed through the church windows, as if the storm outside blessed his words. Eliza felt the thunder vibrate in her bones. For the first time she sensed victory within reach. But war is never kind. Freedom demands sacrifices not yet paid. The battle for independence had breached the sanctuary, and the enemy would not retreat quietly. Chaos churned inside the church like a storm trapped in wood and stone. Colonel Harrow shoved through the crowd, desperate to escape the humiliation he once intended for an innocent girl. Patriots seized him by the arms, rough hands fueled by years of hunger, insults, taxes, and the boots of English arrogance. They dragged the aristocrat back to the altar where he had planned to shackle a child's future. Now his disgrace would be laid bare before every set of trembling eyes he had tormented. Captain Cole stepped forward, gaze sharp as a bayonet. His voice carried the rage of a silenced people. "You wish to force a marriage?" he snarled. "Then you take vows first." Gasps fluttered through the room, hope rising beneath fear like embers beneath ash. Harrow's face twisted, disbelief, then terror. He was losing control, and control was all a tyrant ever held. The side door burst open. Jonah Briggs dragged in a hog, mud-soaked, foul-smelling, snorting. With rebellion. A beast pulled from the filth behind the barn, the only creature worthy of sharing vows with a man whose soul was rotten to its core. Laughter crackled like fire from tongues still learning courage. Children giggled through fear. Women covered their mouths in shock and delight. Even the walls seemed to shake with long-denied joy. Harrow fell to his knees, struggling against the hands that held him. "You will hang for this," he spat, voice cracking under the weight of his crumbling supremacy. Cole leaned close, breath cold as grave dirt. "We already hang," he hissed. "Every day we live under your crown." Reverend Pike stood trembling, torn between salvation and damnation. Yet the ribbon with truth still lay at the altar. The ledger still exposed vice. And the people demanded justice. His voice trembled like an old bell. "Do you, Edmund Harrow?" He swallowed his shame, then spoke with sudden firmness. "Take this beast as your lawful spouse." The church exploded. Wild, uncontrollable laughter, a flood of relief after years of silent suffering. Laughter that felt like rebellion, like chains snapping across the floor. Even Pike let a brief smile crack his guilt. Villagers laughed until tears cleansed their humiliation. A new strength bloomed in hearts once wilted by tyranny. Yet beneath the joy, the air still trembled with danger. Sheriff Crow drew steel, his loyalty chained to British cruelty. Redcoats gripped muskets tighter, their hesitation thinning. Harrow's humiliation had wounded something violent inside him. He would rather spill blood than let dignity rise in a colony he despised. Eliza watched from her chair, breathing hard. This moment, this transformation from shame to defiance, was born of her suffering. She felt no triumph, only resolve. Liberty demanded sacrifice. The struggle had just sharpened its teeth. Elias took Mercy's hand. Both knew retribution was coming. British power did not tolerate laughter. It crushed it. The Greys braced for the storm that followed every stolen moment of independence. Harrow's roar drowned out the fading laughter. His pride, shredded, bloodied, now demanded a price. Villains stripped of illusions are always most dangerous. The church, once a cage of obedience, had become a battlefield. Muskets lifted, sabers flashed, children huddled behind pews. But the Patriots did not step back. Not this time. The hogs squealed. Rain hammered the windows. Thunder cracked above, as if heaven itself prepared to witness a final reckoning. The fight for dignity had crossed a threshold. The next breath would decide who rose free and who fell with the empire's corruption. The laughter died as if cut by a blade. Every villager felt the sudden shift in the air, from relief to reckoning. Rain hammered the church roof, thunder drummed like distant cannons. Harrow lunged toward a redcoat's pistol, but hands roughened by harvests and hunger seized him. Farmers who once lowered their eyes now shoved. The tyrant, hard onto the floorboards. His medals scraped the dirt, symbols of domination ground into filth where they belonged. No one asked permission to act. Oppression had already taken too much. The people, once dismissed as Yankee rabble, became patriots in a single breath. A mother who had lost her son to a British lash spat at Harrow's boots. An old militiaman pressed his cane to the colonel's chest with fierce dignity. Even the timid found their voices sharpened by years of degradation. "We bow to no empire," they roared, voices united, echoing off the walls like a newborn nation learning to speak. Redcoats raised muskets to silence the awakening. Their captain barked orders, but hesitation cracked discipline. They had expected obedience from the weak, not rebellion from the righteous. Justice, once silent, now stood armed beside the altar, a weapon forged from truth and fury. Sheriff Crow, cornered by the people he had terrorized, growled threats, but his voice lacked the iron it once carried. A father who had seen his land stolen shoved the sheriff back, eyes blazing with liberation. "Your badge belongs to the same crown that starves our children," he said. "We owe you nothing." Eliza watched the transformation unfold, the oppressed reclaiming their humanity, humiliation melting into courage. Her heart pounded as the ribbon fluttered in her hand, its hidden proof already having shattered illusions. Her body might have been confined to a chair, but her spirit had become a banner no tyrant could tear down. She wheeled herself forward, Mercy and Elias standing like sentinels at her sides. The path she travelled was no longer a march to shame. It was a procession of victory. The crowd parted, respect shaping their movements. She stopped before Harrow, who knelt in the dirt, breathing like a cornered animal. Rain dripped through the shattered doorway and onto his polished shoulders. Mud clung to his uniform. His gaze, once dripping contempt, now flickered with fear and disbelief. How dare the colonists turn the world upside down? How dare the wounded lead? Eliza lifted her chin. "You tried to buy my dignity," she said, voice low, calm, unstoppable. "But I am Patriot blood. My value is not yours to name." Harrow snarled through clenched teeth. "I will burn this village to ash." It was not a threat. It was a confession of the cruelty that lived inside him. Captain Cole stepped behind him, musket pressed to the aristocrat's back. "Try," he challenged. "Watch how fast empires fall when the people wake." The villagers erupted again, not in laughter this time, but in promise. The promise of rebellion, of sacrifice, of a future worth bleeding for. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall the British could not break without drowning in their own shame. Eliza felt fire blooming behind her ribs. The hidden truth of her journey was clear now. Even those who cannot run can lead a revolution. Even those the enemy mocks can. Ignite transformation. Freedom is not granted, it is seized. Lightning illuminated every face, determined, scarred, alive. The storm outside was not the only one rising, and as the colonists closed ranks around Liberty's spark, the empire began to tremble. The hogs squealed and bolted into the rain, vanishing into the night like a soul liberated. Harrow remained on his knees, drenched in mud and humiliation, his medals rattling uselessly against his chest. A monster stripped of illusion, a tyrant reduced to a mockery of power. The villagers dragged him through the streets he once ruled with contempt, feathers sticking to his soaked uniform, his boots scraping the dirt he believed beneath him. Every jeer was a verdict. Every shove, a reclaiming of dignity stolen by crown and coin. Inside the church, the ledger crackled in the flames, the ink of oppression turning to smoke. Debts forged by greed dissolved to ash beneath the watch of God and country. Mercy held Eliza close, tears falling not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming force of pride. Elias knelt beside his daughter, heart at last unbound from shame. Captain Cole saluted Eliza, not out of pity, but honor. Patriot, he called her, and no word had ever held greater truth. Her wheels rolled over the floorboards like the first drumbeats of revolt. She did not run, but she led, each turn of the wheels a declaration that chains would never define her. The bell tolled once more, yet this time it was no funeral for the spirit of the colonies. It rang for liberty. It rang for the awakening. It rang for the day. A young woman who could not stand still rose higher than every soldier in red. The villagers gathered in the storm, lanterns flickering against the dark sky as Harrow was cast beyond their borders, exiled in disgrace. He stumbled into the night, a warning carried on thunder. When the people unite, tyrants fall. Eliza looked out over the soaked earth, the storm washing away the last traces of submission. She felt the cold air fill her lungs, air finally belonging to those who had earned it. Her journey had begun with helplessness and ended with transformation. She was no longer a girl used as leverage. She was a symbol, a flame, a reason. History would remember this night, not because blood was shed, but because courage refused to kneel. The wheels of freedom turned, and no empire was strong enough to stop them. If you felt the power of this story, if your heart stood with these Patriots, I would be honored if you tapped like and left a comment below. The flame of freedom lives in me.